Hello, everybody. It's Joy. I'm so sorry. I was running a little bit behind today. But thank you. Come join in, like, share this page. We're going to have a good discussion today. We're going to discuss about the hips today. And it's going to be a great discussion. I love talking about health and fitness. It is so involved. And it's a lot of information, and it can take so long to discuss so many parts of the body because the human body is beautiful and it does some amazing things, and we can go on forever and ever and ever discussing it. So I would just like to welcome you to discussion of the hips. So my goal in us discussing the body parts is to help you understand where they're located, what they are, what they do, how they function, and the muscles that cover those groups and how they impact you in your daily lives when it comes to functionality, when it comes to quality of life, when it comes to aches and pains, how these different areas impact you and why you get such an impact. So again, like and share, comment, invite somebody on, and let's have a good time. And so I have some assistants today, and I'm just going to show them to you. So this is my male assistant. He is anatomically correct. You will see that he has muscle parts here that are exposed so that we can talk about them from the skin aspect and from the deep musculature aspect. And so I have this male guy. And I have this female. Again, she is anatomically correct. So you will be seeing these guys in a lot of my discussions as we go through the different body parts and muscles. And then we have my skeleton. He's a pretty tall guy, and so we will be referencing him, and I'll be showing him to you when it comes to us referencing and talking about the bones. As you can see, again, he is anatomically correct from the skull all the way down to the feet. He's a pretty long guy. I think he is like 18 inches tall. And so we're going to be using him today. And so I am super excited to get started. I'm going to sit him to the side because he's actually the first guy that we're going to use to discuss. And I hope he stands up here like a good champ for me. And I might have to hold him down and put him back here for now. And be right back. My pointer fell. So, if you are there, tell me what you know about the hips. Write it in the comments. Let me see your comments. This time I'm going to scroll down my comments because last time I missed a lot of comments. Tell me what you know about the hips. Anybody? Just what do you know them to do? What do you know is their function? This is an interactive video, so I want to see your participation. Tell me what you know a little bit about the hips before I tell you what I know about the hips and how they help you and what they do. I'm going to give you guys a couple of moments to write your comments. Anybody? Okay, so I guess nobody wants to to be the first to say what they know about the hips. So that's okay. I will get going, and we'll get started. Okay. So I'm going to get my guy back here, and he is going to help me demonstrate. And I have my pointer here. I don't want to stand up. All right. Okay. So these are our hips, and the pointer should help you see a little bit better, the little red dot. Okay. So the hips are here. Okay, right in here, and they are attached to our pelvic girdle, which is here, which is our pelvis, and there are bones that make up our pelvis. We have the superior iliac crest, just right here, and then you have your my skeleton is falling apart right on live TV. Okay, thank you for telling me that Fenice help bending and squatting. Okay, so, and then you have your acetabulum here, which is the socket, and this is your femur bone. So I'm going to bend his knee up so you can see just a little bit more. I'm going to turn it to the side. So this is your femur. Okay. And as you can see, it is rounded here. And then it kind of has a little funny projection because this, I hope you guys can see, is your kneecap. And these are the ends of your patella. And they fit right into your tibia and your fibula, which is down here. Okay, but we're going to get to those guys later. We're going to focus on the humerus today. Does anybody know what muscles cover this bone? Okay. All right. So this is a little different for me with the little skeleton helping me. So give me a minute here. So the hip, which is here, is a ball and socket joint. As you can see here, hope you guys can see my little guy better. The ball and socket joint. And it's named that way because the way that the bone sits into this groove here. The movement that is associated with this joint is called circumduction. So it allows the hip and the leg to move in all planes of motion, right? Transverse, sagittal, okay? And it can move in all directions, move around in a circle. If you've seen gymnasts, you know that they can move their legs in many different directions than we even thought humanly possible, right? So that's what this joint allows us to do. And it is attached to a hinge joint, which is our knee, which we're going to talk about in a later discussion, but this is our knee, which is a hinge joint. And these joints are named again for the way that they move and how they allow our bodies to move, okay? So that hinge joint allows us to do just that. So when you bend your knee, it's better that it's a hinge joint where it just allows it to kind of bend and fold like you open and close a door. Doors are hinges, right? They're on hinges. And so this joint kind of acts and moves in or articulates in that same manner, right? And so we're going to get to that because as you can see, these bones are, let me get my pointer. The bones here, they're so interconnected with one another and they impact each other in that same manner. Okay, in the interconnectedness of them and how they move, and how when one is impacted, how it impacts. If your knee is impacted, then it impacts both the hip, the low back, the ankles, and the feet. And as we move downwards, you are going to see and find out the full connection and understand the better understand better the full connection of these joints and how they move, and why it's important to keep them healthy at all points in time. So I'm just trying to get this guy here so that you can kind of see better. Okay. So again, this is your femur. It is one of the largest, longest, heaviest bones in your body. It is built so because it supports a substantial amount of your body weight. It helps with you balancing that body weight and distributing that body weight to other portions of the lower extremities, from the knee on down to the tibia and fibula, down to the ankle and to your foot. So here, all the way down. Okay, tibia, fibula, and down to the ankle and your foot. Okay. So, with that being said, this bone is important that it stays healthy because of the movement in the hip area here. Let me see if I can move his arm. So right in here, I hope you guys can kind of see that laser where I'm pointing. Right up in here. This is your ball and socket joint. And so as you can see, it is truly round, and it really fits snug into that joint like this. And it's round. And it's important that it remains smooth and round so that it can articulate properly in that groove, the acetabulum, when it's moving. And a lot of times when people begin to have problems here, it is because there is erosion right here. He's not clear. And that smooth part, so I'll just point right up in here. There begins to be erosion here and inside this socket, the acetabulum, the way that it is moved. So there's erosion of that bone, meaning the bone is been rubbing. You don't have any more cartilage there. The padding that keeps that bone moving and there snugly in that joint, and you have issues, and it starts to erode in here. And so that's when people start to have pain when they're moving, whether it's sitting or standing, and then that pain begins to radiate up through the lower back and down into the knees, okay, into your knee, and further. Let's see if I can do it without him falling further into your ankle joint and down into having problems with your feet and your heel. Okay, it's all connected. Okay, are there any questions so far? Okay, all right. So does anybody know what muscle groups are positioned over the the femur? I'm sorry. This is your humerus. The femur and the hips. Anybody? A guess? Okay. If there be no questions, no answers, I'm going to kind of tell you. Okay, so muscles involved in hip flexion. Okay, hip flexion. It's my guy. Okay, there you go. Hip flexion and extension. Okay, Flexion is closer to the body. Extension is moving away from the body. I'm going to take his arm off so we can see a little bit more. Okay. Hip flexion and extension. You have muscles involved such as the psoas major. You have the iliacus. You have, and I'm going to grab my other guy to show you that portion. This is a little different with my little props. Okay, let's see. All right, I might have to lift him up. Okay, so I'm going to have to try to, okay, that shows a little bit better. So, again, we have, okay. So, we have tensor fasciae lata. You have your sartorius muscle here. Okay. You have your rectus femoris. You have your gluteus medius, gluteus minimus. Okay, the gluteus maximus here. I hope you guys are being able to see this. This is so different. I need to practice this a little bit more. Hip flexors are in the front for me. Okay, right here. So you have your abductor longus and brevis in here. You have to pull him up perfectly in front so you can see these guys. You have your adductor muscles here. Okay. You have your adductors. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Can you see it? Oh, okay. Can you see him better, Sean? I'm trying to get this pointer. Okay. Is that better now, Sean? So this long muscle, I'm going to just have to point to it. Let me do this. So this is a little different. I'm sorry, guys. So this muscle right down here, that's your sartorius muscle, okay? This would be your quadriceps muscles, okay? And you have your biceps femoris, no, I'm calling off the wrong stuff. Okay. So then in here you have your deep hip flexors. Can you guys see this? I'm gonna have to work on this. Oh, you saying we can see? Oh, okay. All right. Girl, I'm sorry. I was like, I thought you said you couldn't see. Okay. Sorry. Okay. All right. All right. So in hip flexion, as I was saying, you have your psoas major, your iliacus, your tensor fasciae lata, which is this little group of muscles deep inside, right up in here. You can see. Okay. You have your sartorius, which crosses the hips from the front all the way down here and inserts right around the knee. Okay. You have your rectus femoris, your gluteus medius and minimus back here, your adductor longus and brevis here. Okay. And then you have your hamstrings back here. Okay? You have your popliteal space. And there are a bunch of other small muscle groups in here that help us, again, flex the knee, flex the hip, and extend the hip. As you can see, that movement, I hope that's better. Flexion and extension of the hip. Okay, so this is the case in basic walking, flexion and extension here, what we call ambulation or gait, running or walking up and down the stairs, which also includes knee flexion and extension here, because that's why it's the way that it hinges, right? It allows you to have that smooth movement of the leg upward in the upward direction, but it is assisted with this hinge, this ball and socket joint, which allows this bone to articulate or move in the direction that we need it to move. Okay, and so you will find that my little knee, the hinge portion of the knee allows us to get that that kind of 90-degree angle of the femur bone, right? So when you're sitting down, let me see if I can take this guy off of here, kind of stand him up. So when you're, I'm gonna hold him in my hand. So when you're sitting, come on and sit down, guy. So when you're sitting, you still have the hip flexion, you stand, you extend. So that is how you're moving. You're supposed to properly move. And that knee being, because if the knee was like a ball and socket joint, your bottom portion of the leg would kind of be going all in type of circles and everything, and that's not the movement that it was designed to go. So we want to be able to hinge enough to allow you to sit, which is hip flexion, or stand, hip extension, or you have flexion and extension when you're walking, but at the knee, but the hip is there as well, which is why when there are issues or degenerations here, that the person normally feels issues both in the lower back here. There's problems with the hips here, the muscles that cover here. So you have your hip flexors, your psoas major, the iliacus, tensor fasciae lata. They all make up the hip flexors that cover the actual hip bone. And so when you are having issues there, a lot of times the muscles are weak. They're not built properly. They're overworked. So you have some type of tendonitis going on there. And then it begins to affect the knee joint, because a lot of those muscles, they insert at the hip and they cross two joints. So not only are they starting at the hip, or their point of origin is at the hip, and then they cross over the entire femur, but then they insert around the knee, okay, or at this portion of the femur, and then it causes issue with the knee. So this is how we get patellar tracking issues. You have the iliotibial band that usually runs right along from here at the top of the hip and down to the knee. It's an insertion point. And so this is how you are all interconnected. and why movement and form makes a difference, right? How you move and how you build those muscles which cross at those intersections on the bones, how they make a difference. So I'm going to bring up my bone guy. My muscle guy, my bone guy didn't want to stand there. So when we are trying to understand the movements of the hip, we know that there's hip flexion. We know that there is hip flexion and extension. We know that there is also knee flexion and extension. And there is circumduction, so you can move your leg around in a circle, or you can move it laterally in and out. That's ABD, bringing it close to you. ADD, duction, moving it away from you. These are all movements that are possible in the hip joint because of the ball and socket joint, and it allows that joint to move in multiple directions. Now, the other ball and socket joint is our shoulder, but we'll look at that later, and we will find that we have some of the same issues or injuries in the arm, have problems with the pec or pulling or tearing of the biceps, but we will get to that later. We're going to talk about our legs and its position, and why strengthening these muscles and muscle groups here is very important on the back. So you have your quadriceps, right? And then you have your hamstrings on the back. You have your gluteus muscles. Let me turn him this way so that you can see how they are. Oh, I'm having a rough time. I'm going to practice more, guys, with my guys. I thought I had, but I see not enough, so that you guys can get a good view of the gluteus muscles and all those muscles of the legs that help us when we are moving, right? And so one important fact that I want to tell you about that kind of impacts and has a factor in movement of the hips is the Q angle. Okay? The Q angle is a measurement between your pelvic bone, the superior aspect of it, or the top aspect of it, kind of this ridge, superior portion. It's a measurement from this bone down the femur, on top of the knee, right here. So it's an angle that they measure from here straight down over the knee, right? And in males, that angle is between 10 and 14 degrees. And in females, it's between 15 and 17 degrees. Okay? If that angle is small or non-existent, you will find a condition that is commonly known as bow legs, but in its scientific term, it's called genu varum. So that means that the legs kind of they wobble out. You know what bow leg people look like, and that is because okay, I will. I thought I was. Oh, okay. Thank you, Ida. Because I didn't think you guys could see it. It wasn't showing well for me. So thank you for letting me know that. So when again, that angle from here, what they call the superior portion of your crest, which is your pelvic crest, iliac crest here, all the way down on the front of your patella, which is this little guy right here. Okay. And so when that angle is super decreased, what you find is somebody who is bow leg. We know what bow leg people look like. And the term is called genu varum. Okay. If that angle is large, meaning larger than the 17 degrees found in females, then you have what you call as knock kneaded. And we know what knock kneaded people look like, right? Knees knocking together. We kind of call them pigeon toe, right? And so, why is that important? And the scientific term is called genu valgum. Genu valgum is knock kneaded. Okay, and so why is that important? It is important because those angles determine the motor unit connection of the muscles and how they move when you innervate them or are looking for a muscular contraction. I'm trying to stay as layman's terms as I possibly can. I didn't want to get on here being super scientific, but I like to let people understand what they are learning so that they will know both the scientific and the layman's terms so that they can know what's going on. So when we are training our quadriceps and or our hamstrings, we want to make sure that we train them equally so that they and also our hip flexors. We want to make sure that we train them properly, and we want to make sure that we train them equally so that the right motor groups are firing at the right time. And what I mean is that one of the reasons why you see a lot of hamstring strains is most of the time the quadriceps and the hip flexors are exerting more power than the hamstrings can handle. And so they kind of overpower that muscle, and they create more force than the hamstrings are able to manage, and that causes it does put a strain on them. And so if that happens, then you get improper motor unit firing, as well as the form and posture of the person is going to be affected, as well as with a person who has some other issues, developmental issues in terms of how their body is postured, meaning the Q angle, what we were just discussing. If you're bow leg, you have issues, and if you are knock kneed, you have issues in performing some of the exercises just because the way of how your body is naturally set up. And so other compensations have to be made, or I won't say compensations is a bad word for this, for describing this. There has to be an alternative way or modification, it's better, of performing certain exercises so that you build up those muscles on a consistent basis, and that they are built up equally so that you perform the right, or you innervate or fire the right muscle groups for the right action, right? So an example, when you, let's just say you sprain your ankle, right? Our bodies naturally compensate by limping, right? And when you put more weight on the leg that is better to help maneuver the leg that is hurting, right? And as a result of that, you fire muscles or muscle groups improperly in order to compensate for you not being able to walk normal because you hurt your ankle. And so in a sense, what that does is it overworks muscles that were not necessarily designed to create that particular motion. And as a result of it, you can have what we call a compensation injury. Okay. And so you want to know kind of injuries and things that we kind of see when we have improper firing of muscles in their groups or muscle groups that are designed for certain muscle actions. Okay, so most common with the hips, outside of deterioration of that joint of the hip, which is the ball and socket joint with the acetabulum and the head of the femur fitting right into it, you will find that by it deteriorating, it causes there to be an impairment in the way that the hips are moving. The way that they are creating flexion and extension, you will find that there is a compensation, and you will find that the muscles covering the femur, the quadriceps and the hamstrings, you will find that they no longer fire properly because they're compensating for the pain or the improper joint movement and muscular firing in the leg that is affected, right? So that's where you get strains, you get tears. Sometimes that's where, well, all the time, most of the time, you get patellar tendinopathy. It's where you develop the IT band syndrome, patellofemoral syndrome, which is the way that the knee tracks back and forth, because these muscle groups that cover the femur from the hip all the way down to the knee, they also cross or some of them insert at the knee joint. And so when they are, for example, in IT band syndrome, okay, that is a cartilaginous tendon that runs down from the hip and inserts at the knee, okay? And when it becomes tight, it pulls on both the hip and the knee joint, causing you to have lower back pain and knee pain at the same time. And so when that happens, it causes misfirings in the quadriceps and the hamstrings and the hip flexor muscle group, which is tensor fascia lata, which is the iliacus, which is the psoas major and minor. So it causes in that muscle group the muscles to begin to misfire because the joint itself, that bone itself, is off line and it's not moving properly, and so it pulls on those muscles improperly, and so that's where you begin to have the pain. And we find that the entire body is a kinetic chain that is linked to each other, so that when one chain is off, it begins to have a domino effect and affect all the other chains. So that when the hips are off, it causes problems in the hips, down to the knees, down to the ankles, down to the feet, up to the low back. Then you have some issues in the upper back, because things just begin to pull and stretch, because the body ultimately is trying to get itself back into alignment. And so it starts to shift things to kind of quote unquote get itself back into alignment. So that's why it's also important that you should minimize your exercises and what you do, and that you should modify should you experience some type of injury within those muscle groups, because your body will begin to compensate and it will begin to use other muscle groups that were not designed to move for that particular movement pattern. They're not designed for that, and so it just throws your whole body off. Okay, so how do we strengthen it? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to assess. We're going to assess your impaired areas. So maybe an area that you had a strain or a sprain in, or you twisted some type of way when you were walking, and now the body is still trying to heal. You had some swelling. Now the swelling's going down and kind of aching. You still kind of limping. So we have to assess what's going on. We have to assess what muscles have been making the compensatory movements to take up for the area that was impaired, and we have to correct that so that we can begin to get your body to fire the proper motor units at the proper time for the proper movement. And so that comes through assessments, and there are a lot of assessments, and I'm not going to get into all those assessments. Okay, then we need to a lot of times stretch out that compensatory group of muscles, because they are so contracted with trying to help the body make a movement that this muscle group wasn't really formed to make. So we have to stretch them out. We also have to stretch out the area that was impaired, because it has kind of, I don't want to say atrophy, because atrophy takes a little while. And usually that's after a very severe injury where you're out. You've needed surgery and you had to rehab, so you will see some muscular atrophy. And atrophy just means that the muscle mass has decreased, some of the functionality has decreased or been lost, or the muscle has forgotten how to perform it. And so through when you're going through, I can't think right, I'm having a brain freeze right now. When you're going through rehab, there it is. That's why a lot of times they are reteaching the muscles how to move again, how to fire again, because muscle movement first happens neurologically. It's a neurological to muscle pathway first, before we get the muscle to know exactly what it's supposed to be doing, how it's supposed to be feeling, and what muscle groups should be firing to make this particular movement. And that is why form is everything. Okay? Form is everything. I don't care if you can lift a car. If your form is improper, you're going to, number one, hurt something eventually. And number two, I can bet you your bottom dollar that you really can't move the weight that you really think you can, because you're using your back and you're using your shoulders and you're using every other muscle group to help you lift this weight, but the muscle groups that you're trying to focus on. So that's why when you train with me, I'm always screaming in your ear about form and focusing on the muscle groups that we're working on, and always pointing out to you what muscle groups we're focusing on, so that those muscle groups are the ones that are firing and doing the work, and the ones that you're building. Those things are very, very important when you're working out. Okay, so then we also have myofascial release, which are adhesions or trigger points, or what we call knots in your muscles. When you feel that your muscles are tight, that is because they are they have developed little knots in them, because they're like bunched up like this. And so we want to smooth those knots out, those adhesions, what we call them, so that you are working with the full length of the muscle, because that's very important. Strengthening a muscle that's in this form versus strengthening a muscle that is in this form, it makes a huge difference. Also, there then becomes some improper movement mechanics that happen when you are working with a muscle that is bunched up versus one that is fully lengthened and ready to go through the full contraction and relaxation movement. And so that all makes a difference. That's why form is very, very extremely important. Okay. Then, as I said, you want to correct those movement patterns. So once we figure out what's weak, what has been overworked, we want to strengthen those things that need to be strengthened, and we want to bring relaxation or balance back to that muscle group that has had been taking compensation for that area, then once we get that going, then we can start with strengthening those different areas. How do we strengthen the hip flexors in particular? We can do ball bridges. There's abdominal ABB and AB deduction work that has to take place. There are glute raises. There is hip flexion work where we are doing knee drives. We're doing gluteal extensions to strengthen up all those muscles that surround that joint and those bones. So the hip joint itself, which is the ball and socket, and the entire femur, because they all work in tandem, as you can see on my skeleton, my good friend. You have your hip over the femur, and it comes all the way down to the knee. Okay, and so these work in tandem, meaning they work as a group together. And usually, if one is off, it pulls the rest of them off. Okay, and so that's why we kind of study them individually, but yet collectively, because a lot of muscles that cover your iliac, which is your pelvis, and your hip right in here and down to your femur into your knee, a lot of these muscles either originate or insert or have an action along the same pathway. And so when they have, when there is an error in one, it results in the others compensating because they are so closely interconnected. Okay, I'm hoping you guys can see this to see why. Okay, and so next week I want to talk to a couple of persons who have had hip flexor, complete hip replacements, and we want to discuss about their journey and what caused them to finally get the help that they needed when they finally got it. So I thank you for your patience. I hope that you have learned something. Forgive my bumbling. I'm going to practice with my assistants a little bit more throughout the week so that I can get the right angle so that you guys can really see the areas that I'm speaking of, and we can have a more interactive conversation. So with that being said, thank you for your time. Join me next week. I will be on time. I just had some little issues going on, but I'll be on time next week. And I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of your evening. Okay, goodbye.